There are places on Earth that don't look dangerous at all. No warning signs, no monsters, no dramatic flames. Just water, a shoreline, and silence. But in Russia, there is a lake with a reputation so terrifying that people call it the deadliest lake on Earth. A place where simply standing too close for too long could be lethal. And for years, the Soviet Union did everything it could to keep the truth hidden. This is Lake Karachay. Lake Karachay isn't famous because of legends or ghost stories. It's famous because it's real. It is connected to one of the most secretive and dangerous operations of the Cold War, and a nuclear facility that most people outside the Soviet Union didn't fully understand until much later. In this video, we are going to break down where Lake Karachay is, what happened there, why it became so dangerous, and how long it stayed hidden from the public. Because this story isn't just about radiation, it's about what happens when an entire government decides silence is safer than truth. Lake Karachay is located in the Chelyabinsk region of Russia, near a place known as Mayak, a major Soviet nuclear production facility. And this is important. Mayak wasn't just any research lab. It was part of the Soviet Union's race to build nuclear weapons during a period where everything was rushed, secret, and dangerous. Back then, countries weren't thinking about long-term environmental safety. They were thinking about power, survival, and winning the Cold War. And that mindset created places like Lake Karachay. To understand why this lake became so deadly, you have to understand what Mayak was doing. When nuclear material is produced, it leaves behind radioactive waste, and not the mild kind. We are talking about waste that stays hazardous for years, decades, even centuries. The problem was, the Soviet Union needed a place to dump it. So instead of proper long-term containment, one of the methods used was dumping waste into nearby areas. And one of those areas was conveniently Lake Karachay. At first, it may have seemed like a practical solution. A remote location, controlled territory, no public access, no questions. But the waste didn't disappear. It built up. And over time, the lake became something completely unnatural. A body of water carrying radioactive contamination so intense that it turned into an invisible threat. Because radiation doesn't always look like anything. It doesn't smell, it doesn't make noise. And by the time you realize you have been exposed, it's already too late. Here's what makes this story uniquely horrifying. Lake Karachay didn't become dangerous from one single explosion. It became dangerous through years of silent build-up. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe you could point to and say, that's when everything went wrong. It was slow, it was gradual, it was hidden, and it reached a point where the radiation level around the lake became extremely unsafe. In simple terms, this was a lake where the environment itself became hostile. Not because of a predator, but because of something humans placed there. And the scariest part is, the lake still looks like a lake. It doesn't look like a science fiction disaster zone. It looks calm, quiet, normal. One of the reasons Lake Karachay became such a famous mystery is the secrecy around the entire Mayak region. During the Soviet era, facilities like Mayak were deeply classified. Not everyone knew they existed. Cities near these sites were often closed, restricted areas with limited access and very little outside communication. And when accidents happened, the world wasn't told. Even local people often weren't told the full truth. If something made citizens sick, explanations could be vague, misleading, or delayed. Because in a system built around secrecy, admitting danger is admitting failure. And failure in that era wasn't just embarrassing, it was unacceptable. So the story of Lake Karachay isn't only the story of radiation, it is the story of information being controlled. Now here's where the story becomes even more disturbing. In 1967, the region experienced conditions that lowered the lake's water level significantly, and when the water receded, something terrifying happened. Parts of the lakebed filled with radioactive material were exposed, and then the wind carried the contaminated dust away from the lake. This meant that the pollution didn't stay in one place anymore. It moved, it spread. And when radioactive contamination spreads through air and dust, the impact can reach far beyond the original site. It becomes a silent disaster that's difficult to track, difficult to stop, and terrifying to understand. This was no longer just a dangerous lake. It was a radioactive source that could contaminate surrounding areas. At this point, it is important to explain something carefully. Radiation isn't horror like a movie monster. It's worse in a quieter way because it can affect the body without immediate pain. Exposure can damage cells, cause sickness, and raise the risk of long-term health effects. It can harm organs, it can cause severe illness, and high exposure can become life-threatening. That is why places like Lake Karachay are so terrifying conceptually. It's not just dangerous, it's invisible danger. The type that doesn't give you a warning when you're already too close. So why wasn't Lake Karachay known worldwide the way Chernobyl was? The answer comes down to timing and attention. Chernobyl was a massive event that couldn't be hidden. It spread internationally, and it happened in a world where information was beginning to escape borders faster. Lake Karachay, on the other hand, was part of a larger hidden system. It existed behind restricted zones, secrecy, and limited press coverage. And for many years, it wasn't discussed openly in a way that the global public could fully understand. It became one of those Cold War truths that slowly leaked out over time, not in one dramatic revelation, but in pieces. Reports, mentions, and scientific references. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. There was a place in Russia where nuclear waste had turned a lake into a lethal hazard. Eventually, the danger became too significant to leave untreated, so efforts were made to reduce the risk. One of the major actions taken was to prevent the contaminated lakebed from being exposed again and spreading dust. Over time, Lake Karachay was filled in to reduce exposure and isolate the contamination. It's a haunting idea, not cleaning it, not removing it completely, but sealing it, covering it, trying to contain something that should have never been there in the first place. And even that solution carries a heavy message. Some disasters can't be undone, they can only be buried. Lake Karachay isn't just a lake, it's evidence. Evidence of what happens when truth is buried along with toxic waste. And even though most people will never go anywhere near it, the story still matters because it proves one thing. Some of the most terrifying places on earth don't come from myths, they come from history. This has been the Concealed Archive, and this file was never meant to be seen.